Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. I am Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And today we're going over part 2 of the history of Naughty Dog. Tyler, take it away.
All right. So I want to preface this one again by saying that a lot of the information I'm getting here is coming from that IGN article, which is very, very good. Similar to how we did the Ultimate History of Video Games. We're sort of doing a little book club on this IGN article because it is very long and multiple parted.
We're citing our sources. Look at us, like a real history podcast.
That's right. I just don't want people to listen to this and go, wow, this is all the same information that's in that article. These guys are frauds. They're phonies.
I mean, I like to think that people listen to us because they don't want to read. You know, they want to sit in their car and just have someone tell it to them. And that's what
we just read the article to them.
We do all the reading for you. Yeah, I mean, that's true. But then that would lose some of our characteristic podcast unprofessionalism that everyone knows and loves.
That's right. Okay,
that's true.
So when we last left Jason and Andy of Naughty Dog, they are Naughty Dog now, they are no longer Jam Games, they had split up with EA after feeling like EA kind of took too much creative control from them and their product suffered for it. Remember with Keith the Thief, they were like trying to make this normal RPG that wasn't like a funny thing, and then EA was like, no, you got to make it funny. Here's a comedic writer to make it funny for you. And then they were like, okay. And then after the game didn't do so well, EA was like, oh yeah, you guys probably shouldn't have tried to make it funny. And they were like, are you serious right now? So our guys were pretty salty about that, and I don't think you can blame them.
I forgot about Keith the Thief. What a great name.
Which is a great name. Yeah, just fantastic.
Excellent. They should do a remake of that. Him teaming up with John Glames.
Yeah, John Glames, Keith the Thief, and Jaybird.
That's right. It's like GoldenEye, where Jaybird is like a super weapon, and they have to stop it.
Yeah. All right, so it came time to find a new partner. They had a few options at this point. They had 3 companies kind of vying for them or fighting over them a little bit. They had Crystal Dynamics. This is the team that would go on to make the Tomb Raider games, I'm pretty sure. Oh, I didn't fact check that. I just pulled that straight out the dome, so
you know
I think that's correct.
Sometimes you got to go off the dome.
Yeah, Crystal Dynamics. We had 3DO. Trip Hawkins, that was he left EA. Remember, he went to go start up 3DO, and they had made Way of the Warrior for 3DO, so they were already familiar with Trip. They knew how he operated, and the last person, interestingly enough, was Universal Studios, which is a company that wasn't really known for making video games, but they wanted to step into this arena and try their hand, see what they could get done.
Hey,
ultimately,
Tyler,
yeah,
you're right. It is Crystal Dynamics.
Yes,
right off the dome.
Cool. Glad we did that. I think they're owned by Square now, which is why the newer Tomb Raider games are like Square Enix games. I think they're still made by Crystal Dynamics though.
Yeah, the first one was made by the first one was made by a company called Core Design, but the series in general had some Crystal Dynamics ones, and then they were published by Eidos Interactive.
Oh, that's right. And then I'm pretty sure Square bought Eidos.
Yep, in 2010.
Boom.
The mini history of Tomb Raider.
Great. Maybe we'll get into that someday.
Nope. That's it. That's all we're going to do. We're never doing it. I'm just kidding.
That's all we do for Tomb Raider. You know, I'm not very familiar with Tomb Raider. I didn't play any of the old ones. I haven't played any of the new ones. So
I do. I did, and I have a story, and it will have to wait until we do the Tomb Raider podcast. I'm writing that down on the list of things we do. All right.
Tomb Raider podcast. So back to our boys at Naughty Dog. The deal with Universal was the one they kind of decided was best for them because it gave them a lot of creative control over their games, which they were definitely all about right now. Universal would retain the rights to the characters they created while under contract with them, so that was kind of the downside. But they also kind of just wanted to live in LA. Remember when Jason wanted to go learn how to surf? So now he can move to LA and learn how to surf.
His dream's coming true. That's so nice.
So if they'd gone with someone like 3DO, then they probably wouldn't have made it very far because that console just really didn't do very well. And their game, Way of the Warrior, was decently received, but it was on a console that just was dead on arrival, which is kind of a bummer. So they made a deal with Universal for 3 games. And they didn't know what they were going to do yet, but they were on a cross-country road trip, and they started forming the idea for what would become an action mascot platformer for the fledgling PlayStation brand. They were heavily inspired by Donkey Kong Country that had just come out around that time, and it was like revolutionary with all those pre-rendered 3D sprites that were so cool and still look really, really good today. I'm a big Donkey Kong Country fan.
Oh, yeah, we all are. Everyone should be a fan of those games.
Yeah. One of the upsides of Universal not really knowing that much about making video games was they're just stoked to have a contract with Naughty Dog, and they were like, make whatever you want. I'm sure it's going to be great. You guys made a lot of great games already, so just do whatever you want. It's going to be cool. And they could do it. You can make whatever they wanted on whatever platform they wanted, and Universal was just like making it rain money. You guys can't see me, but I'm doing the money thing where you hold your hand out and you just like throw money out of it.
Tyler is indeed making it rain on the podcast right now.
Yep. Mike gets it.
I get it.
So even though 3DO itself didn't really work out, they still liked that they were exclusive to that platform. They had a thing for platform exclusivity, probably something about not really having to port your stuff to other consoles. Remember they made, was it Rings of Power? That's the one. They made it for PC and then had to port it to Sega, and they were like, ugh, this is not a great experience.
It's a hot bummer.
Yeah, so they liked being exclusive to the 3DO because it let them just focus on making a 3DO game using all the features of the 3DO that were probably pretty cool, but no one ever got to see because nobody bought a 3DO. But they were because 3DO was dead, they were trying to find a good platform to make this action platformer on. They saw how well games like Sonic and Mario had done, and I don't know if they thought the PlayStation had a gap they could fill or if they just really liked the PlayStation hardware, but ultimately they chose to make their game on PlayStation hardware. And Sony was they still are pretty friendly towards indie developers, but they were also especially friendly toward indie developers in the early days of the PlayStation when like Nintendo and Sega were just not as friendly to indie developers. So they were like, this is great. We're going to make games for the PlayStation.
And I mean, they're still technically really friendly with Naughty Dog now, you know?
That's true. They own Naughty Dog, I'm pretty sure. Or maybe they just have an exclusive like contract with them or something.
I'm going to look that up, even though we're probably going to talk about that in the next episode about Naughty Dog. But I'm going to look it up anyway.
All right.
You keep going.
So Universal asked them, they were like, what would make development better? What do you guys need? What can we do to help? And their reply was, we're still a two-man shop. We would like to hire more developers. So, and they had been this two-man operation for like 10 years now. They had a little bit of outside help on some other games, but they hadn't actually hired any new employees. So Universal gave them that opportunity. They said they could hire some employees to make the thing. So they hired two people, Dave Baggett and Taylor Kurosaki. Kurosaki worked at Universal already doing visual effects for a TV show, which was super impressive for the early mid-90s because TV shows did not have CGI at the time. It was like this show that he was working on basically and Babylon 5 were the only TV shows with CGI in them. So Kurosaki was about the same age as Jason and Andy, and they all kind of worked in the same building, so they hung out a lot. They became friends, and Jason and Andy had access to some really cool high-end CG tools to make their game, and Kurosaki was like, I want to learn how to use these tools, and I want to make some games. And they were like, well, he didn't say he wanted to make some games. And they were like, you can come use our tools. How about you come work for us? And he was like, that sounds great. So they hired him. And then after making their first hires, this is in January of 1995, they got to go to CES, the Consumer Electronics Shows. That's where all the cool new video game stuff was being shown. E3 did not exist yet, but the first E3 would be that summer. But for now, CES was where it was at.
Hey, if you want to go learn more about E3 and CES, we did an episode on that.
That's right.
Yeah, now do I know the number of that episode? Absolutely not. You'll have to go find it. But
whatever podcasting app you use, hopefully has a search function.
Oh, yeah, it should be on there. Oh, by the way, Naughty Dog is owned by Sony.
Okay, yeah. So Sony was at CES in January 1995, and they were showing the first PlayStation off, and it was just seriously blowing everybody's minds. They were just like, what is this? So the way they settled on making Crash Bandicoot was by looking at the industry trends at the time and trying to make something that takes advantage of the public's desire for that kind of game. And they wanted to make their own, like, and innovate. Like, they didn't want to go too far off the beaten path of the tried and true formula, but they still wanted to make it their own. And at that point in time, it was all about the platformers. Like, I would say most of the 90s was about platformers, both 2D and 3D. So Mario and Sonic were crushing it. Yeah. Mario and Sonic were crushing it. Naughty Dog wanted in on that. But how were they going to do something different? Well, in 1995, 3D was starting to become the cool, hot new buzzword. It was sort of becoming a new thing. The 3DO kind of had some 3D capabilities, like the Sega 32X had some rudimentary 3D capabilities, and you had like the Super FX chip on the Super Nintendo that like kind of did some 3D stuff, but nobody was really making anything that really, really just felt good in 3D. But Sony had something with the PlayStation. That was just something else. The 3D on the PlayStation was miles ahead of anything anybody had tried to do before in a home console. And it was pretty clear that they needed a platformer game that transitioned the genre from 2D to 3D. And they wanted to be that company. They wanted to make Crash Bandicoot a 3D platformer.
Dun, dun, dun.
Thank you.
You're welcome. By the way, I think that the fact that the 90s were all platformer filled, and this is just complete speculation and opinion on my part, by the way, is that's what helped get so many people into video games later on. Because everyone knows how to play Mario.
Yep, it's super easy. It's just, hey, make it to the right side of the screen, avoiding obstacles and collecting power-ups. And like that's a pretty simple thing, but also has room for huge amounts of mastery, too.
Yeah. So thank you, platforming. You're the best.
Yep. So basically the concept they came up with was to take a standard platformer and then just turn the camera on the main character's backside and then just follow that character from behind. They referred to this as, and this is true, the Sonic's ass game. So I don't know if we want to bleep that or not, but that's what they called it. So
you can say that on television. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bleep it because what if we bleep it? Someone will think it's probably something way worse.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's not that bad.
No, it's not that bad at all.
So they considered doing it fully open world, but they didn't quite trust in their skills to make that happen because Super Mario 64 was still in development. It didn't exist. Nobody really knew about it. And so the world hadn't really seen what a true open world platformer could play like. But I do give them kudos for recognizing that that's what it could be. Like they didn't choose to make Crash the way they made it just because they couldn't think more outside the box of what a platformer was. It was just that that's just what they chose. They knew that they could make it that way or they could make it open world and they just chose to make it that way, which is fine. It's a creative choice, right?
And it's also better they did that way too, because it's got to be so hard to get, like the Super Mario 64 development cycle was really long. If I remember reading about it correctly, because they had to get so much stuff right. It was just a whole new genre. And if you get that wrong, we may never have seen Crash Bandicoot. It might have been one and done.
Yep. So it took a long time for them to come up with the design for Crash himself. They had cartoonists and animators come in to really help them hone in on the look and feel of the character. The team at Naughty Dog all kind of had an equal hand in making the game, but everybody had their own specialty. Like the team was small and agile enough that pretty much anybody could fill in for anybody else on art or level design or whatever, and so they could kind of switch things up if they needed to. But the overall design of the game and the character itself is hard to pin on just one person. It was really a collaborative effort that happened over the development of the game. And I'm sure they actually had access to some really prominent animators and stuff because they had connections with Universal. They worked in Burbank. They worked basically in the Universal building. So I'm sure they had a lot of access to really, really talented folks to help them. So,
oh man, by the way, isn't the original Crash Bandicoot, you might be getting to this too, but isn't it really hard? It gets really hard, if I recall.
It probably does. Yeah, I have the Insane trilogy that I picked up from the Humble Bundle, so I played that for a little while today. I've never played any Crash Bandicoot game, but I was like, you know what? If I'm going to do a podcast on this, I should probably check them out. So I played a little bit of all three games. It didn't seem too hard, but I also only played the first few levels, so I'm sure it gets really ridiculous.
I think it gets pretty difficult. If I recall, I played it as a kid, so that's how long ago it was. I don't really remember.
I found it really difficult because you take it just a standard 2D platformer, but turn it on its side and you're just running forward the whole time. I found it hard to judge the distance on jumps, how to make it over, because it's hard to see the depth. But I'm sure you get a feel for it after, if you play for a couple hours, you figure it out.
Yeah, or it's just messing with people with poor depth perception.
Yeah, yeah. They called Crash Bandicoot Willy the Wombat for a long time because he basically looked like a wombat.
I wish they stuck with that.
Yeah, Willy the Wombat. They drawn a lot of inspiration from things like Looney Tunes, so his look is very similar to a character you'd find in a Looney Tunes cartoon. I think he looks like he fits right in, with Taz, the Tasmanian Devil, and Daffy Duck, and all those guys. Except for most of the Looney Tunes characters don't wear pants, right?
Yeah, it's true. Crash Bandicoot's very classy compared to the other ones. He's not Porky Pig in it. He's not going the shirt no pants thing. That's weird.
He's doing the pants no shirt, and he wears drawstring pants. I'm pretty sure they're just sweatpants. He's not trying that hard. He put pants on, but
yeah, he just got off the couch. Is what we're learning.
Yeah. Sony was also super helpful to Naughty Dog, which it kind of endeared them to the platform. And they still, to this day, they don't make games for anything else. I don't think they've ever made a game for anything else. Like, Insomniac made Sunset Overdrive on the Xbox, and I don't think Sucker Punch made anything for anything else either. But Naughty Dog is like, we're a PlayStation shop. We make only PlayStation games. So it was actually a little bit easier for them to get access to development tools from Sony, since they technically were an independent developer. And like I said before, Sony was very friendly to indie developers at the time. Most other big companies like Nintendo and Sony made you go through a lot of process and red tape, and it ended up being like a really big hassle to get a development kit. So much so that, remember, EA made their own like bootleg development kits to sort of get around that. And also they didn't really like the terms that Sega offered them. But I'm sure that the red tape involved in getting a development kit also contributed to the strange, shifty development kits that EA had for the Sega Genesis.
Oh yeah, the reverse engineered ones.
Yeah. They really got Sony's attention though when they casually passed a tape of Crash Bandicoot, like a tape, like a VHS tape, of like gameplay
tapes?
of it. Yeah. They like gave it, like had a friend. They're like, hey, can you just like casually give this to someone at Sony? And they did. And Sony came down to the studio to see the game that they're working on. And they were like, oh my gosh, this looks so awesome. They knew they had a hit on their hands, and they knew that it could be the answer to whatever Nintendo was cooking up with Mario or whatever Sega was working on with Sonic. Spoiler alert, Sega was working on nothing with Sonic because the Saturn never had a Sonic game.
Oh, do you think they taped over something to show the tape of Crash Bandicoot, like a soap opera?
Yeah,
or like
probably.
Or like a Discovery Channel special or something?
It's like an episode of Star Trek.
Yeah, and they're like, oh, you taped over my favorite episode.
This was my favorite episode of Star Trek, but if this is what it takes to get Crash successful, Measure of a Man can be taped over.
I remember as a kid, my mom would give me my brother and I, one VHS tape to tape our shows on, and that means we have to tape over stuff. And it's no, we're losing it. No,
you had to like decide if you wanted to keep the thing you wanted or not.
Yeah, do we keep this cartoon movie that was on TV, or do we like re-record over it to get a different cartoon movie that's on TV?
Yeah. So whatever Sony had in their number one slot for EA or for E3 that summer, they bumped it. They put Crash there. They were like, Crash is our game this year. We're showing it off. And that E3 was a really big E3 because Nintendo showed off Mario 64. Sega showed off Nights into Dreams because the Saturn wasn't launching with a Sega game and would never get Sonic game, and would never get a like mainline Sonic game. It would just kind of get a bunch of sort of side games and compilations. So that helped Crash out a little bit that Sega really didn't have anything cool to show. So they knew that they really only had to compete with Mario 64. But Mario 64 was like something else. Like they saw what Nintendo was able to do with the fully open 3D worlds, and they were super impressed. Like, you got to remember, the world before Super Mario 64 was a very different world, and they totally blew everybody's minds in 1995.
Man, I remember watching it and jumping into the paintings and stuff. You're like, what is happening?
It's so cool. But Naughty Dog did console themselves with the fact that Nintendo wasn't able, they had these massive worlds, but they weren't really able to pack it quite as densely as Crash was able to. Like, Crash's worlds were smaller and more directed, but they could fit so much more stuff in them, and like put so much more detail into them because they weren't so big. So they made a trade-off, is what Jason said basically to IGN. It's like, we made the call to go this way, they made the call to go that way. Both games are fine games. Now, personally, I find Mario 64 to be the better game. But the PlayStation outsold both the N64 and the Saturn by a huge margin. So Crash also outsold everything Nintendo put out for Mario, except for Crash Team Racing, which is crazy because Crash Team Racing is way better than Mario Kart 64, and I will fight you.
You know this, everyone. Don't even try to talk to Tyler about it. He'll fight you. He's told me. He showed me his brass knuckles that say Jaybird across them. He's not afraid.
I'm not afraid to throw down over Crash Team Racing, which reminds me, I got to buy the Steam version of the remake of that.
There's a remake of it?
It's so good. Yeah. They did like the full like insane Crash trilogy. Actually, I don't think there is a Steam version. I think I got to get it on Switch.
Oh, I was going to say, if there was a Steam version, we could both get it and play together, and I got really excited.
Yeah.
We just like stop talking about Destiny every week, and we just start playing Crash Team Racing way too much.
Crash Bandicoot launched on September 9th, 1996, right around the same time as the Nintendo 64 came out, which was also in September, at least in North America. So in Crash Bandicoot, you play as Crash, the titular Bandicoot, as he traverses 3D platforming levels to save his friend Tawny, or forget her name.
I think Tawny is right.
Okay. She's being experimented on by the evil Dr. Cortex, which is the same bad guy who experimented on Crash, and I think that's part of what gave him his Nito powers. The story is, you're not playing this game for the story. All you need to know is, where am I headed? Okay, great.
It's Tawna.
Tawna.
Sorry,
Tawna.
everybody. I thought it was Tawny, but we were one letter off.
Dang it. So Crash can jump. He can run. He can do a spinny move that damages enemies. The player collects power-ups, and you find a lot of secrets, and you pick up fruits, and overall, it's a pretty good time. If you haven't played Crash, like me, you probably should, because it's a piece of gaming history, and it's pretty fun. It's pretty neat. I'm probably going to get back to the Insane Trilogy on Steam and play a little bit further. And the game got really stellar reviews. It did a great job of bringing the platforming genre into 3D in a different way than Mario did. So the fact that they hadn't tried to go with the open world strategy that Nintendo did for Mario meant they were pretty different in the market, still scratching that same platformer itch for consumers, but just in a different way. And they really crushed it there. They crashed it. Am I right?
Nice.
Got
the high quality humor you come to this podcast for, everybody.
That's right.
We write this for 12 hours a week. It's not true.
Nope. So both Naughty Dog and Sony knew that they had a pretty good game on their hands, but neither expected the game to take off like it did. So at the time, Sony wasn't really concerned with having a mascot character. That's what Nintendo and what Sega did, but Sony wanted to be different, and they were pushing the PlayStation brand above all else. Like they didn't care about having a character, just wanted PlayStation to be its own thing. And that made sense at the time, but you can't stop what the people want, and it became pretty clear that the people wanted Crash. And so Sony made a pivot, and they pushed the air advantage there. So the first Crash game was pretty notable because it sold really well in Japan, over 1 million units, which was pretty unheard of for an American-developed game to sell in Japan. Like most of the time in Japan, they get a game developed by Americans, and they're like, I don't want this. This is not for me. But Crash broke the mold, sold really, really well in Japan. Mike?
Yeah.
Do you remember those Crash Bandicoot ads from back in the day with Crash like sitting outside Nintendo and Sega headquarters with a megaphone? He's like yelling at the building.
My favorites. Seriously. Yeah. I actually love those commercials.
Yeah. He's like in a costume with like a face hole cut out in the teeth. Like it's just a dude in a costume, not even trying to, they're not even trying to be Crash. It's a dude in a costume, and it's really funny. He's got like a megaphone. He just shouts at the buildings, like just talking crap. It's great.
Oh man. That commercial just reminded me of another game's commercial that makes me want to do a history on that game, and that is Super Smash Brothers. The original Super Smash Brothers commercial was so good.
I love that with that. It's not so happy together.
Yeah. And they're frolicking in the field, then all the mascots start beating each other up. Oh, it's perfect.
Yeah, and it's just people in suits. Like you could tell it's just costumes. It's so fun.
Oh yeah, so fun.
Yeah. Crash Bandicoot was a hit. And what do you do when your game is a hit? You get started on the next one. So development on Crash 2 Cortex Strikes Back, sort of like Empire Strikes Back, hit hard and fast in October, right after the first game came out. So this time, they got a little bit bigger budget. They got $2 million this time compared to the $1.7 million they'd been given for the first game. So that's pretty cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah, but the one downside of being the smash hit that they were, there was way more pressure to deliver again and quickly. So originally, they had planned on the development cycle for Crash 2 to be 2 years long. But Sony and Universal both came to Naughty Dog, and they were like, you got to do this faster. We got to strike while the iron's hot. Crash is hot. Time to get another game out there. So they demanded a faster pace. And Taylor Kirosaki, remember one of the first guys they had hired, the visual effects guy?
Yeah.
He had a whole list of things that he wanted to do for Crash 2, and he knew that was going to take a couple of years. But when he realized the schedule he'd been asked to work on, he straight up left. He was like, I'm out. I can't do this. And he would come back, though, like 7 years later to work on Jak 3. But when Sony was like, you got to go faster for Crash 2, he was like, nope, I'm out.
You know what? I appreciate that he didn't want to stress himself out. That's a healthy outlook because developer burn is real. Okay.
Yes, it is.
And he just stepped away. That's probably the smarter idea for him as far as his, well-being goes.
Yep. So they moved on without him, relenting to the pressure, and they built Crash 2 very, very quickly. But behind the scenes, it was starting to become clear that Universal wasn't actually doing anything during the development of Crash 2. So at this point in time, Sony was all in on the funding of the Crash franchise. So here's a quote from the IGN article from Andy Rubin. Sony was funding it. We were making it. Universal was just pushing through the money. They would get it from Sony, sit on it for 90 days, and then give it to us. And then we would spend it. So that's all Universal did at that point. They were just a middleman for Sony to give their money to. Then they passed the money on to Naughty Dog. And
that's got to be really easy for Universal.
Yeah, that's a pretty good gig. And I mean, the upside of that is they're not trying to mess with the game at all. They're not trying to tell them what to do. They're just trying to tell them to do it faster, which is a little bit frustrating. But it was starting to become clear that Universal wasn't really giving them much except for the Crash characters. Now, remember, they signed the deal with Universal for 3 games and the characters. So Universal owns those characters of Crash Bandicoot.
Ooh, that sounds like that's probably why they could release it on the Switch, like you were saying, huh?
Yeah. Yep.
Sony doesn't own that.
That's right. So basically all Universal was doing at this time was letting them use Crash Bandicoot, which is funny because they made Crash Bandicoot themselves. So it's like, you didn't even do anything here. You're not even doing anything. But that's part of the deal. They were on contract to make at least 2 more games. So yeah. But according to IGN, there was also one pretty big benefit of working for Universal. Mark Cerny worked for Universal. And Cerny was, at the time, he was the vice president of Universal Interactive Studios, and he was a total beast when it came to programming. So it was this programming prowess that led him to feel like he didn't really belong at Universal, so he spent a lot of time at Naughty Dog helping them make the Crash games. Much later in his career, Cerny would go on to be the lead architect and producer for both the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation Vita. So this guy, He's got some chops, all right? And if striking a deal with Universal is what it takes to get Mark Cerny to help you out, it's probably worth it. So
Mark Cerny, true video game legend. You heard it here first, right, folks.
Yep. So they were pretty stoked to be working with Mark. But after Cerny left Universal because he felt like he didn't really contribute, this just wasn't the right place for him, Naughty Dog kept contracting with him. They were like, we can't lose you, even though you're away from Universal. Please still help us out. So Naughty Dog kept growing. There was 8 people that worked on Crash 1. There were 16 to 19 people for Crash 2. So they more than doubled their team between Crash 1 and 2. It's still a pretty small team by today's standards, but much, much bigger than the 2-man operation they had going on back in the Jam days when they were making games for the Apple II.
I miss the Jam days.
Me too.
I miss those Jam days.
Me too. They should release like an EP of music and just call it the Jam Days.
The Jam Days. Ooh, that's a good idea.
Yeah. I don't know if they have much musical talent, but if they do,
right.
You're welcome. You can have that one for free.
Yeah, it's a free idea on a free podcast. You're welcome, Naughty Dog.
Yep. So even though they had a shortened release schedule, they still managed to get Crash 2 Cortex Strikes Back out the door in November of 1997. So they worked on it for less than a year, which is pretty crazy. The studio was getting bigger, and Crash was getting even bigger than that, and Universal just kind of sat back and collected their fat royalty checks, which is a pretty good gig.
Starting to look like the bad guy a little bit, okay?
A little bit.
Really, I mean, I get they signed a contract and all, but you didn't even do anything, Universal. At least put Jaws in the game or something.
Yeah,
maybe put Frankenstein in there, something you own, you know?
So they had to make at least one more game for Universal. So they started development on Crash 3 Warped in January of 1998. So they got a little bit of a break between Cortex Strikes Back launching and then getting started on the next game. But it was still the same kind of deadline, and Naughty Dog had to deliver since they were under that 3-game contract with Universal. Crash 3 added several new engines to the game. They had one for the airplane sections and one for the jet ski sections, one for the motorcycle sections. These are all separate systems, which is pretty crazy. And then in addition to everything they had built for the first 2 games. So it was getting pretty complex even for a PlayStation game.
I forgot that Crash game had all those different segments in it.
Yeah, there's a lot of different stuff going on in that game. One notable thing about Crash 3 was the advertising campaign. By this point, Sony knew they had a hit, and so they put a lot of marketing dollars into Crash. This is when they started up with those megaphone commercials. But they famously teamed up with Pizza Hut, and they had these funny commercials where Crash was like going around yelling at people at how to eat pizza with the megaphone inside Pizza Hut restaurants. They're so bizarre because, like I said, like it's just a dude in a costume, and it's just not even like there's a hole in the teeth where you can see the guy's face. Like they're not trying to hide it. It's just a dude in a mascot costume, and that's it. That's all these things are. But yeah, those ads are so iconic now that it's definitely worth talking about. So
look those up on YouTube, listener.
Yep. So Crash 3 did really well, and they also made one more Crash game, and it's my favorite, Crash Team Racing, the Mario Kart clone that came out in 1999, 1 year after Crash 3. This actually, funnily enough, wouldn't be the last time Naughty Dog would make a kart racer after making a trilogy of games, because they also did it with the Jak series. They made like a racing Jak X racing game after they made Jak 3, which is, I'm sure we'll get to that in the next episode of Naughty Dog. I personally am still waiting for Uncarded and The Last of Us kart racer, so maybe someday.
Uncarded is perfect.
But at this point, the relationship with Universal was pretty frayed. They weren't getting their money from them, just from Sony through them. So it was just starting to be just a bad deal. Again, Naughty Dog didn't own Crash, and neither did Sony. So any games they wanted to make about Crash would have to be in partnership with Universal, and they just weren't feeling it anymore. In fact, for Crash Team Racing, they basically made the whole game without the Crash characters in it, which is a bunch of like blockheaded characters. That's according to IGN, that the words they used were blockheaded. And they went to Sony with this prototype, and they were like, gee, wouldn't this be a neat Crash game? And Sony was like, yeah, it would be a pretty neat Crash game. So Sony went to Universal and cut a deal for one last ride.
So it almost didn't even be Crash Team Racing. It could have been Blockhead Team Racing.
Could have been Blockhead Team Racing. So eventually, Mark Cerny convinced them to leave Universal, and it was the right move. Like their split from EA, turns out sometimes partnerships can be really great. They can get you started. They can get you a lot of resources. And then, like at EA when they got their janky Sega dev kits. But a few years later, sometimes you can find yourself a little bit stifled by them or not getting as much out of them as you used to. And so, you know, it's important in the business world to know when to call it quits. So they left Universal. But Universal retained the rights to Crash, so every Crash game, because there are Crash games after Crash Team Racing, they were all made by Universal and Activision, and they're nowhere near as good, and the character kind of dropped off the map at that point. A similar thing actually happened with the Spyro series, where Insomniac had a deal going with Universal. Universal really nailed it when they were signing those deals early on in the PlayStation's life. They signed Naughty Dog and Insomniac and got two really awesome trilogies, maybe more than that. But once they gave up on that franchise, they sort of ran it into the ground. Universal did, both Crash and Spyro, unless you count Skylanders, because those are, I guess they involve Spyro, and they continue to sell like hotcakes and gangbusters, as far as I know.
I was wondering what Skylanders was. So that's like a Spyro spinoff?
Yeah, I don't really know what the gameplay is, but I know the central hook is, so you buy the Skylanders game, and then you also buy the Skylanders like figures that you scan the figures, and then I guess you can use them in the game. So they're really lucrative because kids get their parents to buy the game, and then kids beg their parents to buy all the little figures too. And so they just
like
make a bunch of money.
Amiibos, right?
Yeah. They were like the Amiibo before Amiibo. So yeah. Oh man, I would love to do an episode on Insomniac like this. I know we did the Ratchet and Clank game series, but I would love to do Insomniac as a company, like how we're doing Naughty Dog now, because I think their PlayStation journey is similar to Naughty Dog's. And they were actually very close studios, very good friends. They would share technology back and forth. One thing I was surprised about when I was doing the research for this was I always thought or assumed that the Crash and Spyro series sort of ran concurrently, like came out at the same time, but they didn't. The first Spyro game came out at like the same time as Crash 3. In fact, Crash 3 actually had a demo for the first Spyro game on the disc. So that's how close those companies were. They included demos for each other.
That's definitely something I thought too. I thought these were right around the same time as each other, and they were definitely not.
No, it's like Crash was first and then sort of passed the baton to Spyro. I've played the first two Spyro games, and I loved those games too. They went with the open world thing that Mario 64 did, and they were pretty good. I liked them.
Yeah, I remember playing the demo of Spyro and it cutting out. I'd have fun for about 20 minutes, then it would end. It would be depressing. Yeah, but I mean, that's just the way it was. It was a demo disc.
Yep.
Remember those? Yep. Oh, gosh, demo discs.
Oh, man. Scott the Woz is a YouTuber who did a pretty fun episode on demo discs recently. You should check that out.
I will check it out.
Some nostalgia going on there.
Does he just play a bunch of different demo discs? I hope so.
Yeah, he like plays a bunch of different demo discs and sort of talks about them, and he's pretty funny too. So I recommend. He doesn't need plugs from our podcast, but he's very popular. And
well, maybe he needs to plug our podcast.
Hey,
should we tell him about that?
Scott the Woz, if you want to plug Codex, a history of video games, on your YouTube channel, you have our permission.
I'm going to send him a business formal email asking him to plug us. And I'll be like, we can't pay you anything but our eternal love and gratitude.
And we'll talk about you on our podcast.
Which we already did, but we're not going to tell him that part. We're just going to make it seem like we're really good at business. Anyway, I remember the last demo disc I had was actually for Xbox, original Xbox? Yeah. And it was showing off Oblivion.
Oh, cool.
It had like videos as well as game demos on it. And the video was like the making of Oblivion. Like they went to Bethesda and talked about it. And it was like, this is revolutionary. Huh? I think I've talked about this before on the podcast. I probably have. I'm running out of video game stories, Tyler. But anyway, you should keep going.
Oh, man. Demo discs are so great because it was just like a whole bunch of games on one disc that like you could just play them. And like they were like, it would usually just be one level. But yeah, that would be fun to do a history of demos.
Oh, yeah, because mine had Spyro, Metal Gear Solid, not the first one, but I think maybe the second one, and then it had Siphon Filter. Remember Siphon Filter?
Oh, yeah. That would have been the first Metal Gear Solid, because that was the only one on the original PlayStation.
Okay, then it was definitely those ones then, yeah. I think I had those ones then.
Was it one of the Pizza Hut discs? I remember they would hand out demo discs with the pizzas.
It probably was. Really, really dug Pizza Hut in Eagle River, Alaska. You know how we do it there.
Yep. Okay, so at this point, Naughty Dog has left Universal and a new specter looms on the horizon, the next generation. And no, I'm not just talking about the greatest Star Trek series, but it is the greatest Star Trek series. I'm talking about the sixth generation of gaming, led by none other than Sony and the PlayStation 2. Of course, Naughty Dog's going to want in on that, so we'll talk about it next time on Dragon Ball Z. Mike, what you been playing?
So this week has been a travel week for me. We actually pre-recorded last week, everyone. I hope you didn't notice. But we do have some new reviews to talk about. So I'm going to mention that in my thing when I get to that point. But I've just been playing Destiny 2 with you because I was on the road in Little Rock, Arkansas and Oklahoma City. And now I'm back for 9 hours. So what have you been playing?
I've been playing a lot of Destiny with you and a little bit by myself too. And I made a little bit more progress on Link's Awakening, still chipping away at that. And today I played a little bit of the Crash games. I played a little bit of all three of them in the Insane trilogy. And the graphics on that remake are really good. Like, it's really fun.
And it's for Switch?
Yeah, it's on Switch. I'm playing it on Steam because Humble Bundle had like a deal where it was like $10 and you get the Spyro trilogy, Call of Duty, World War II, and Crash, and like a bunch of other things too.
That's a really good deal.
Yeah, the Humble monthly bundle is usually a pretty good deal. They have a lot of cool stuff in there. So
awesome.
Yeah, but that's basically it. I think that's pretty much all I've been playing. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. No, I think that's it.
Are you ready for me to talk about our wonderful new brand spanking new reviews we got?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. So the first review we have is on November 4th, 2019 from Old Goat Dog.
Old Goat Dog.
I like this name. These guys are awesome. I don't have the time to go back and play any of my old favorites, but listening to this podcast fills that void. My favorite part is being reminded about games I forgot were old favorites, like Earthworm Jim. Yay, Earthworm Jim. It's like seeing an old friend who you haven't seen in a long time in an unexpected or random place. That's a great way to put our podcast, I think.
Oh, thanks.
Right? Didn't you like that? I thought it was great.
Yeah.
Anyway, the next one. You ready for it?
Yeah.
The next one is on November 7th, 2019. This is from Snug21. Kept hearing Mike talk about this podcast from the Hug Life podcast. It's another one I do that I never talk about on here. Currently listening to the Pokemon episodes. It's pretty great. Edit. How dare you guys forget about Hey You Pikachu? That game was my favorite growing up. Wow.
Oh, wow.
I feel like we made a friend and an enemy at the same time.
Hey, you Pikachu. That was a weird one with a microphone, and I've never played it, so I don't know how well it worked.
You know what? There were so many Pikachu-themed spin-off games that I think I could do an episode on that just for Snug 21.
Wow.
I'll do that for you, Snug 21. That's how much you mean to me. So
You heard it here, folks.
You did. You can also, Tyler thinks Crash Team Racing is better than Mario Kart, and I will do a podcast for a listener. Hot takes. But you can always rate and review and subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, whatever. Spotify. We have Spotify. Ooh. You can email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. Other than that, I think that's it for this week, right, Tyler?
I think that's it, too. Nice. We'll keep it a little bit short and tight this week. I like a little bit of shorter ones that you can kind of finish in one sitting, you know?
One long drive. Do you want to say bye to the listener first? I feel like I always say bye first, and then you say bye last, and I feel bad. I want you to get the full time with the listener, you know?
Bye, listener.
Bye.